Around the year 1100, the Heian period witnessed the founding of the earliest kuniyaki tradition of pottery. Kuniyaki, or country pottery, is the term used to describe the regional pottery of Japan. The first area to produce distinctive kuniyaki was Tokoname, in present-day Aichi Prefecture, in south-central Honshu. Old Tokoname wares were made of stoneware and acquired a natural ash glaze, known in Japan as bidoro. Wood ash will vitrify or turn to glass at temperatures above 1,150 degrees centigrade, in particular when it mixes with additional alumina and silica. Pine, cedar, and cypress ash are especially good for creating a natural glaze. The thickness of the bidoro, or ash glaze, suggests that the firings were long. As the molten glass built up to a certain thickness, it began to run down the sides of the vessels. When the ash glaze is thin, it looks like salt glaze and could be tan, gray, or reddish brown. When it's thicker, it tends to be an uneven green, gray, or bluish color. The old Tokoname kilns were associated with Buddhist institutions on Mount Hiei. In the Okawa area of Mount Hiei, Buddhist sutras were copied, and the practice of burying them in the ground and building earthen mounds over them was observed. Throughout the Heian and Kamakura periods, especially between 1130 and 1150, great numbers of Tokoname vessels were used for sutra burials. These have been found at sites in most parts of Japan. Before they were placed inside the Tokoname jars, sutras were rolled up and put into cylindrical bronze containers. The mouths of the jars were covered with shallow bowls called ohirabachi. This is a typical Tokoname Sutra burial vessel from the Heian period. It's of a type that has impressed designs. There are 4 bands of impressions around the body. This kind of marking only occurred during the Heian period. The shape of the vessel is also typical of the Heian period. The body and mouth are wide, but the foot is quite small. This form helped prevent cracking during drying and firing. The small foot would not have been practical on a pot intended for daily use, but these were destined to be buried. This jar was found in the grounds of a temple in Hidakacho. The Lotus Sutra that was discovered within it bears the date of 1158, and the jar can be assumed to have been made in that year. The ash glaze on most Tokoname wares is green, but sometimes it can be a light brown. The clay body is a fairly coarse stoneware and varies from chestnut color to white. Some wares were carbon blackened. Variations in form can be observed over time. During the Heian period, Tokoname jars have necks that are drawn in tightly and lips that are thin and sharp. This jar came from a sutra mound that was dated 1130. The glaze is exceptionally well preserved since the burial was deep and a large amount of charcoal was added around the jar. The jar contains 7 Fujiwara, or Middle Heian period, bronze mirrors. The Middle Heian period, 951 to 1086, is also known as the Fujiwara period, for the clan that held the greatest power in Japanese government from the late 9th until the late 11th century. This was a generally peaceful period, and as a consequence, it was a time of great activity and leisure pursuits such as music, poetry, and art. During the Middle Heian period, the mandalas of Shingon Buddhism decreased in importance, and a new emphasis was placed on the concept of rebirth in the Pure Land of Amida, one of the Dainichi's transcendental Buddhas. A monk of the Tandai sect named Kuya popularized the idea of universal salvation through veneration of Amida. To assure admission to paradise, one had only to constantly recite the Nenbutsu mantra, Namu Amida Butsu, or Hail Amida Buddha. Consequently, Kuya's doctrine had a following among illiterate commoners, as well as members of the aristocracy. Even today, it is the most popular Buddhist sect in Japan. In this sculpture of Kuya from the Kamakura period, the monk is shown reciting the Nembutsu mantra with each of the 6 syllables, Namu Amida Butsu, represented by a small figure. He is shown as if on a pilgrimage, striking a gong with his right hand and holding a staff topped with a deer antler in his left. Another influential monk in Pure Land Buddhism was Genshin, who wrote about the great ceremony called Raigo. In the Raigo ceremony, Amida would welcome the deceased into the Pure Land. Genshin writes, "The great vow of Amida Nyorai is such that he comes with 25 bodhisattvas and the host of 100,000 monks. In the western skies, purple clouds will be floating, flowers will rain down, and strange perfumes will fill the air in all directions. The sound of music is continually heard, and the golden rays of light stream forth." This image is the central panel of a triptych on silk from the late 11th century. It depicts a Raigo that's based on Genshin's description. The gold figure in the center represents Amida Buddha, seated on a golden lotus blossom. He's surrounded by purple clouds on which float some of the 25 bodhisattvas. In the lower right is Kannon. Genshin describes this deity as follows. At the time of death, the merciful Kannon, with extended hands of 100 blessings and sublimity, and holding out a lotus seed of treasures, will appear to the believer. At the lower left of this image is Dai Seishi. Of him, Genshin writes, "The Bodhisattva Dai Seishi and a numberless host say in one voice, 'Blessed art thou.' Uttering these words, he places his hand upon the believer's head, and with the other hand draws him to himself. At this time, the believer beholds Amida with his own eyes, and his heart is filled with great joy. His mind and body are at ease now, and he's happy in a state of ecstasy." This early 12th century depiction of Amida Buddha depicts the deity seated on a lotus blossom. He welcomes the deceased, making the Joban Gesho mudra with his right hand. The figure is made using the Yosegi Tsukuri, or assembled block technique, and it's hollow inside. The face and chest were originally covered in gold leaf. Both hands were replaced at some time in the past. This seated Amida Buddha comes from roughly the same time period as the last, but it's quite a bit bigger, measuring 4 feet 8 inches in height. It's made of lacquered and gilt cypress wood. The hands make the mudra of Raigo, as a welcome to the deceased. The head is relatively broad on this figure in relation to the rest of the body. This is characteristic of the 9 Amida figures at Joruri-ji Temple in Kyoto, although this sculpture was owned by Yakurin-ji Temple south of Kyoto. Pure Land Buddhism influenced the design of temple gardens in the Heian period. One of the most famous examples is Byodoin in Uji. It was originally a rural village near Kyoto on the Uji River, used as a retreat by a courtier named Fujiwara no Michinaga, but it was converted into a temple in 1052. The main building at Byodoin is known as Amida Hall, or Phoenix Hall. Inside Amida Hall is a large statue of Amida Buddha, designated a national treasure. On the walls are angels, suggesting a celestial space. The plan of the garden at Byodoin is meant to suggest that Amida Hall is the Pure Land. The visitor's path to get to Amida Hall is over a bridge to a small island composed of smooth stones, and then across a second bridge to the shore where Amida Hall stands. The implication is that salvation is a journey towards Amida Buddha. Another famous garden of the Heian period is at Motsuji, where stones were arranged to create the effect of a seacoast in miniature. As we'll see in the medieval period, visualization of the world in miniature will be a characteristic of many Zen gardens as well. A point juts out into the lake toward a small island where a single stone is thrust upright like a mountain. Other stones along the shore suggest additional craggy islands. Motsuji had a past as a courtly villa as well as a temple. Today, every year in May, reenactors in period costume hold an event that was popular among Heian aristocrats. Sake, or rice wine, is sent floating down a stream, and participants must compose and recite a poem before they're permitted to drink. During the late Heian period, Buddhist temples were built closer to the capital and were more often founded by the imperial family than by the Fujiwara clan. One of the most important temples to be built during this period is the Sanju Sangendo, or 33-Bay Hall, in Kyoto. Dedicated in 1266, it was constructed to hold 1,001 statues of the 11-headed and 1,000-armed Kannon, the Senju Kannon. The building is constructed as a long hall that's 11 times wider than it is deep. It measures 387 feet long and was at one time the site of contests between archers of the Imperial Guard to see who could shoot the most arrows the length of the building between the eaves of the roof and the boards of the porch without hitting any part of the structure. The building was based on an earlier example called the Renge-oin, or Temple of the Lotus King, built in 1164. When the Renge-oin burned down, 156 of the sculptures of Kannon that it contained were rescued. These became the starting point for the group of 1001 that's contained within the Sanju Sangendo. The group is centered by a large seated Kannon, carved in the Kamakura period, with 500 others on each side. The wooden figures are covered in gold leaf. The smaller figures stand about 5.5 feet tall and are arranged in rows on a stepped platform. In each figure, the largest pair of arms is positioned in prayer. Another pair is clasped at waist level, and a third holds a monk's staff and a trident, symbolizing defense against evil. The rest of the hands hold a variety of symbolic items. In the late Heian period, Buddhist painting becomes even more decorative. Gold is often used on dark backgrounds, as in the case of this image from the scroll of the Greater Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom. Sutras were important in the Heian period. An official bureau existed for copying sutras for imperial use, and copies were also made in the monasteries. Aristocrats copied sutras in order to accrue spiritual merit. Sutras in gold and silver ink on paper dyed purple with indigo were made in China and Korea as well, with the Korean examples being considered the finest. On the inside of the scroll, the first scene is known as a frontispiece. It's usually seen with figures such as this one. The scene is set before Vulture Peak, the setting of Shakyamuni's preaching near Rajagriha in India. The Buddha is seated on a lotus pedestal with bodhisattvas and monks on either side. On the front of the pedestal is an offering table with an incense burner. The figures in the foreground represent 3 noblemen and 4 monks. The Greater Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom is the first of 16 discourses by the Buddha. In this scene, the Buddha is answering questions posed by noblemen and is stressing the importance of wisdom in attaining enlightenment. The brushstrokes are quickly applied, with 2 strokes in opposite directions defining the monks' heads. The clouds in the background have been rendered in silver, and the hills in broad washes of gold. This late Heian period image in paint and kirakane, or cut gold leaf, on silk, is dated 1127 and is one of a series owned by Toji Temple. It depicts Bishamonten, who is one of the 12 devas, or guardians of the four quarters, the four semi-quarters, up and down, and the sun and the moon. Bishamonten is the guardian of the north quarter. Here he is depicted sitting on a pedestal made of felt and holding in his hands a sacred rod and a miniature stupa. This large wooden figure from the late Heian period represents Tobatsu Bishamonten, who is distinct from Bishamonten. He wears the armor of a general and originally held a weapon, probably a vajra, in his right hand. In his left hand, which is a later replacement, he holds a miniature stupa. Bishamonten is usually shown as a member of the Shinten no, or Guardians of the Four Quarters of the Universe, but Tobatsu Bishamonten is always depicted alone. Another characteristic that distinguishes Tobatsu Bishamonten from Bishamonten is the presence of the earth goddess, Jiten, who supports him as a pedestal. In this case, Jiten is flanked by two dwarf demons, Niranba and Biranba, who are usually among the figures who support the Shinten no. This sculpture, carved from keyaki wood, was originally polychromed. Apart from the arms, it was carved in the Ichiboku technique of using a single block of wood. The tall crown bears traces of an ink drawing of 5 seated Buddhas and a small child. This late Heian period sculpture depicts Fudo Myo-o, one of the 5 wisdom kings. He holds a sword and noose to protect believers. His fangs and squinting eyes are intended to impress the viewer with a sense of the deity's power. The details on this figure are carved in fairly shallow relief, as on most Heian sculptures. This enhances the sense of solidity. The piece was carved from multiple blocks. By the Heian period, the practice of carving anthropomorphic Shinto gods and goddesses had become well established. These were ordinarily made of wood, and often of the trees that had been worshipped as the dwelling places of the kami. Originally, sculptures such as this would have been painted. The paint has flaked off, and insects have damaged part of the wood. This figure of a Shinto god sits cross-legged and wears a cap. In his hand is a scepter that symbolizes secular authority. The figure is part of a set of 5 deities, 2 male and 3 female, that are thought to have belonged to the Shinto shrine of Usa Hachimangu on northern Kyushu. Sculptures such as this would not have been visible to the public.